I finally had a breakthrough with RxJS and Qwik. And over the past, I don't know, I have been thinking about this and working on this for, almost continuously for the last 2 days, except for 3 hours of sleep. So I'm kind of like rattled a little bit from all the ideas that have been bouncing in my head. But I've been working on this in general for 3 or 4 weeks now because it's harder than I thought it would be. So I don't know 100% that the solution I came up with is going to be the best solution possible, but I'm pretty happy about it anyway. So again, I'm going to have an article for this. I haven't published it by the time I publish this video. I'm not sure exactly when it'll get published, probably within a couple days of this, and it will include some extra notes at the end of it. So if you're interested in learning more about a dead end that I explored, go ahead and check the YouTube video, the description for the link to that article. All right. So what is the ideal way to use RxJS in Qwik? Ideally, what we would want is for the server to run the application and render it and set up subscriptions between all of our observables and save that subscription data inside Qwik stores so that they can be serialized, sent to the client, and then the app just knows that those subscriptions are active. And so if the user causes an event to fire in one of the parent observables, it then triggers other RxJS to load. So it wouldn't load the entire RxJS stream though. It would be just like Qwik is, because Qwik has use watch and use client effect. And you prefer use watch because you can delay loading the code as long as possible. And what you want is RxJS to kind of mimic that mechanism. So each asynchronous step should give Qwik time to lazy load more code. So even if the user immediately clicks on a button, it doesn't load all of the downstream RxJS immediately. But also, we don't want RxJS to load if there aren't any subscriptions even for the event that happens. So that's another way we can defer loading RxJS as long as possible. We can use that subscription data ideally from Qwik when it rendered on the server to know what events to pay attention to and what events we can ignore. So is it possible to actually do this? What would need to happen is on the server, we would need to have at the very bottom when the subscriptions happen, that subscription data to pass all the way up the stream and have it save that inside a Qwik store as it goes up the stream. Unfortunately, while that would be great, that is not what I was able to achieve. I explained some of the difficulties in the last video I did. It's hard. For example, the event that causes RxJS to load on the front end, on the client, may not pass the same values that RxJS subscriptions are dynamic, and so if a different value comes through, it might be looking for a subscription somewhere else. So how do you clean up the old subscription when it was serialized in a Qwik store and RxJS isn't managing it anymore? Basically, you need Qwik to be able to manage all the subscriptions and all the cleanup at all times. And the coordination is extremely complicated. So I'll add notes at the end of my article when I publish it, but unfortunately, I didn't get that to work. But there is some hope. There is something that we can do with RxJS in Qwik still. And I'm actually pretty excited about the last approach I'm going to go over. But I'll kind of build up to there because some of the utilities are used throughout. And so I'll start simple and then move to the more advanced thing that I think will end up being a pretty good solution. And basically the idea is we need to set up RxJS from scratch on the client. So that's unfortunate, but that is something we can do. So, but we shouldn't be too sad about it, because other frameworks, we can at least lazy load the RxJS still. Like we can do an initial render on the server and have HTML on the client, and then wait for a user interaction before we load the RxJS, and then load all of it. That's the drawback. We have to load all of it, but at least with Qwik, we don't have to load any of it until there's an interaction. So at least that's nice. At least it's nice to do in Qwik. Implementing that, you can implement it in other frameworks, but Qwik supports that kind of thing. That's what its bread and butter is. Okay. But sometimes we'll need a use client effect in order to get some immediate behavior, and that's okay. There are ways to kind of isolate that to the tops of streams until it's ready to load the rest. So I'll go over that. But basically, for the most part, whenever we define any observable, we need to define all the observables it depends on, obviously, because you can't define an observable without without its full definition, which includes what it's referencing. So, but also, it's possible that that when an observable has a dependency, or when an observable below depends on a parent observable, what it's going to do is possibly rope in other observables, and so those also need to be defined. And then for all of this, the subscription only happens at the very bottom of the chain, and so to get the full RxJS behavior that we can trust, we have to basically load the entire reactive graph of observables, everything that's touching, every observable that's touching another observable, whatever it is, all of that needs to be loaded. The code needs to be loaded. And then we set off the subscription at the bottom, if there is one, and that will control the behavior, but at least the code needs to be all loaded pretty much at the beginning. So, or as soon as, at the same time. Okay, so every lazy load in Qwik has to be triggered from like a use watch, okay, or use client effect, I guess. Use watch probably. So that means what needs to be watched is a Qwik store. So every observable that we have, every event that can trigger code to load needs to be triggered by something being set in a Qwik store. So every observable will have a corresponding Qwik store to go with it. Okay, so let's talk about specifics. First thing that we want to consider is user input. It seems like the easiest thing to start with. A behavior subject is very similar to a Qwik store because it has state currently, and then you can set state, and then things react to it. So for my first example, I have a type ahead. So this is what it would look like in pure RxJS. So let's say there's like a behavior subject, and then you debounce that by 500 milliseconds, and then you filter to make sure it's not an empty string, and make sure you don't do two of the same strings. So, with debounce and filtering, you might have the same. Anyway, this is pretty standard type ahead behavior. I don't need to explain it. Okay, and then switch map finally, then you fetch the results, and that will return an observable of the results. So you need a switch map. And yeah. So if we have this, how would this look if we were to use a Qwik store to trigger this? Well, we can have a custom hook that defines a store and it returns a store. So the user can, or the developer can, when there's an event, they can change the property on that store. We'll just do the value property. That's like the best one, the default one. And then we have a use watch inside of our custom hook that will watch for that value being set. And as soon as it's set, it'll define a behavior subject. Where does it put the behavior subject? Well, that's a slight complication because you can't serialize behavior subject. So you're going to put it in the store. You need to be able to refer to it. So it's got to be part of, you got to return it from the Qwik store. from the custom hook. So there's a function called noSerialize in Qwik. So it'll just skip over that value that you pass into it when you serialize it on the server, or just wherever you serialize it, I guess. And you can have that as a property of Qwik stores. So what I did is I defined a property named Rx on a Qwik store, and I gave the Qwik store an interface name of Rx store. And so it's got value and it's got Rx. And so when value changes, useWatch gets triggered and Rx will be defined with a behavior subject. So I'll show you the implementation. But first, let's look at the code that I'm talking about. So how you'd use it. So I'm going to call it use subject. Use behavior subject might be more accurate, but whatever. And so const search A equals use subject, and then you pass initial state into it. And so when you set search A dot value to something else, that'll define the behavior subject. Anyway, then I've got some other stuff down here that's kind of I'll have to go over soon. But first I want to show you the implementation of use subject. All right, here it is. So use subject. It takes in initial state. There's that Rx store interface I was telling you about that gets returned. And it's actually got, actually this shouldn't be part of it. This was something that I should clean up. Hang on. All right, that's gone. Hopefully nothing breaks in my demo. All right, so it does that, and then it's got useWatch, and it tracks the value. And if it's a new value, it's going to set this property activated. I'll go over that later, but don't worry about it yet. And then it checks if it's already been defined, the behavior subject for the store. If it hasn't, then, well, if it has, then it just passes the new value into it. If it hasn't, then it creates it with this function. And this is a pretty simple function. It just returns noSerialize and either the existing one or a behavior subject. I'm not an expert on Qwik yet, so I don't 100% know that this is safe. I should probably just return store.rx or noSerialize, but this is working, so maybe it's a problem if you serialize multiple times, or maybe there's a performance drag somehow, but it works, so I'm not worried about it. All right, so that is use subject. And I showed you this in the article I wrote, but here it is locally, the code that's actually using use subject. And now I'm going to show you what behavior this generates. Sorry, this is a little bit small, but I positioned these SVG paths in all my demos for this size, so I have to stick with this. So anyway, so here's the input with the initial value of search A like we put. Now if we look at the network tab as we type, I'm going to do, oh, whoa, why did that all just load? I hit the shift key. I guess that caused it to load. That's interesting. Well, let's do that again. So I hit A. That is weird. I wonder why. That is very weird. Anyway, so I have so each rectangle is going to represent a Qwik store, and if it's blue, that means the Rx property has been defined. And I added an artificial delay so that you could see the observables get defined as they travel through the streams. So what happens first is, I'm going to refresh again. First, it's just going to load the, I think this is an old version. Hang on a sec. Yeah, I just forgot that I added a utility function that I didn't need, and then I removed it, but I forgot to remove it in this first example. So anyway, right, so this is the click handler. So it just sets the value, so that's the first thing that loads, of course. And then you've got the useWatch that triggers, and that's going to define the Rx observable. So this is where it imports. Is this where it imports? Well, it's going to import create Rx, but that's synchronous, and it's going to import RxJS here. So I don't know what the deal is, but when I've been developing locally, it's been importing the entire Rx library for anything that happens with Rx. But I mean, obviously this should not be the way it behaves normally. Hopefully it'd be like tree shakeable or something. And hopefully this is just like a dev mode type thing. I'm not used to developing on V yet, but yeah. Anyway, but so this is the basic behavior we want. Doesn't do anything until we type, then it loads RxJS, and then after it debounces, well, it's going to load the entire stream first, and then it's going to process the value because the subscription happens at the very bottom. So let's look at further down what the code is doing. First, we have to talk about, so the next thing we're going to do is the use stream thing. But before we talk about that, I need to talk about a general pattern that needs to happen. So when you're defining like the middle observables, first, like a user event is going to trigger the behavior subject to be defined in the very top one. That's what we just looked at with the use subject hook. But in the next level down, you might be combining multiple observables. So what needs to happen is when the first one gets defined, you need to define the middle observable, but you need all of its input observables in order to define it. So that means you need to trigger the code for other input observables to load at that time. So how do you do that? Well, you need to be able to set a property in those Qwik stores that will trigger a use watch. So I named that property activated. So that's what that property was that I sort of brushed over right here. This is setting it in that first input store, but you might as well set it so that the child store doesn't have to set it again. Not that it matters, but this will be set by the middle observable in all of its input Qwik stores. So if we look at this use stream custom hook that I made, and by the way, these names may not be great, but you kind of run out of synonyms for observable at some point. Anyway, so use stream, what it does is lets you define the observable, and I need to edit my article to include an explanation of what this is at some point. Yeah, I do. I forgot about that. Anyway, so basically this grabs the Rx property of the Qwik store. Okay, so it's grabbing the subject. All right, but you also need to provide a list of these input stores here because we need to set up a track to watch all of these. I've thought a lot about this and I hate the redundancy. If there's a way around it, I want to know. Anyway, so yeah. So now I'll start going over the source code, like the utilities that this hook depends on. But first, let's look at an example where it's used, where that behavior matters that I was explaining. So I made a second input observable and a timer, and we'll go over that eventually. So basically, we got 3 top-level observables. 2 of them are subjects. Another is just a regular observable. And then we've got use stream here that's taking in 3 of them, these 3 input observables. So if any of them emits, or if any of them becomes defined, it will know, okay, we need to define all of these. So yeah, I'll use this, and might as well look at the behavior right now so you can kind of see what I was talking about with the activation stuff. Combine, yeah. So let's look at this. All right, so you type here, first defines that, and then red means it's been activated, and then it's going to reach up and activate all the parents. This one gets defined, and then that one gets defined. Now this one's ready to be defined next. Now that all 3 are defined, it can define this, and then finally subscribe and process everything. So it's kind of complicated. So the code is going to be fun. It was fun for me. So, all right. there's a lot of it to go over, a lot of utility functions. So I'm just going to explain from top to bottom, and I'm just going to use my article as like a guide because running through all the files is going to be annoying. So the first one is a utility function I called QRL to Rx, and this would be useful for any time you're going to pass unserializable Rx code through a function into a stream. Okay, so you have to pass it as a QRL, which means it's going to be a function that returns an observable, and it's going to be a promise of that. And so I just did from, get the promise, and then pipe, switch all. And so now you're getting to, so first this returns the promise of a function. I'm not entirely sure why this is working. Hang on. Maybe RxJS can take in a function as well. Well, no, this is a promise. So normally you would call an extra function call right after this. I did that in another place. So I know that works, but apparently this is working somehow because I'm using this. So anyway, all right. Next we have this. It's called use Rx store. It's basically like use subject except without the watches and stuff. It just defines that plain store, the Rx store. And there's that count again. Dang it. It refers to subscribe count or ref count, and I'm sad I never got it to work. Glad I don't have to at the moment. So anyway, now we're ready for the big one, the use stream function. This one is a beast. This is where all the stuff happens. But basically it takes in the stream, like you saw, and then the initial state and an array of dependencies. So the dependency Rx or Qwik stores, and they do have to be Rx Qwik stores. But anyway, so first we're going to define a store for us to put the output values into. Yeah, I don't even know if that's necessary. Oh, it is, because we have to define the Rx property on it so that the children can watch for that. All right, so first we're going to track, because two things can cause the same behavior. One thing is a store can be activated from below or an observable, whatever. And you can also have a definition from above, an Rx property that gets defined that you need to also watch for. So first, we're just going to track if this store property, we're just going to track the activated property. That will be what comes from below. And then we're going to take all of the dependencies and go through them. And you can do this in Qwik, which is nice. But you're just going to track each of the Rx properties. And we're going to keep three things in mind. We're calculating three things at the same time. So some are defined if this ever turns out to be true. So that's why that's an or. All are defined if it's always going to be true. And all are activated if it's if they're all if each of them have the activated property. All right, so we're going to use these later, but yeah. Okay, so hopefully I named them well. So if some of the dependency stores are defined, then we need to activate this one. Okay, and this set timeout, you can ignore it because this is for demonstration purposes. This is just going to be if some defined store to activate equals true. All right, and if it's activated, if this store is activated, but not all of the parents are activated, then we need to go through and for each dependency, just set it to true. If it's already true, won't matter. So that's fine. But yeah, we can also get rid of the timeout here. Yeah. So if activated from parent happens, so if a parent gets defined, this will end up being set to true. So parent gets defined, this will get set to true. This gets activated. Then we need all of these to become activated until all of them are activated. Okay. And let's see. Yeah, and we don't need to worry at that point because once they're activated, they'll lazy load their RxJS code, and eventually they'll just define those Rx properties on each of those stores. So we're also just tracking that. So eventually that will lead to all being defined. And if all are defined, then we're ready now, finally, to, is this redundant? It might be, but it kind of doesn't matter. We're finally ready to set this store's Rx observable. So here's what I was talking about, getting that extra function call. So here's the QRL for the Rx definition that the developer passes into this custom hook. You're going to grab that, and when you execute this, it's going to define that. So this will involve some of these calls, but it's just grabbing those input observable observables, and then it's going to just tap and set this store's value. This may not be necessary. It may actually be bad to have this because with this approach, we definitely would want developers to always use a subscription in order to access observable values. But with this case, it kind of lets people just grab the value if they want, and then if a subscription goes away, then it breaks their feature. So this may not be good to have, this tap here. But I used it actually for, I think I used it for debugging. So that's why it's there, probably. It doesn't hurt to have visibility. It's just, if you use this approach, you should always just get the value at the end from a subscription hook. All right. Well, that's it. And hopefully that makes sense. So the last thing we need to talk about is the thing at the bottom, the use subscribe. Okay, there are a couple ways to do this, but the first one is kind of the passive way. It basically waits for all of its input observables to be defined because of events that happen above that it doesn't care about. But as soon as everything's defined, it's like, hey, look, everything's defined. Or it's actually looking for a single observable. So as soon as that observable is defined, it's like, oh, we are subscribed to that, so it's time to subscribe now. As soon as it's defined, it needs to be subscribed. So let's look at that code. All right, it's pretty simple. We need an output store for the result, and we're going to have use watch that will pass the arguments into this utility method that I made because it's used somewhere else. But this is actually what's going on. So like I said, it's tracking that Rx property. If it's there, it subscribes, sets the output value on cleanup, it unsubscribes. Very simple. Okay, so that's that. All right, for the next one, this is the second example where Rx might be triggered to load. So what would trigger it maybe this time is if you know there's some observable up there that's going to emit basically right off the bat, and you need that functionality immediately. And I don't know 100% that this is the exact code structure that you want, but I thought maybe it'd be easy to at least implement this so that you can have this behavior if you want. Basically, with the use subscribe hook, instead of just having a passive use watch that's watching for the parent to be defined, it's going to have a client effect that proactively activates the input observable. So Let me show you that code. All right, so basically I called it use subscribe client. I think client is a nice indicator that it's going to use a client effect. And yeah, that's all it does. And then it literally just returns the same thing as use subscribe. This is the only extra thing it has. So let's look at that behavior now. So I'm going to change the code to use client. And now if we go up here, you see it immediately gets activated. That's this represents that stream, use stream observable. So this is the middle observable. It contains the results. The subscribe, maybe you'd think of it as below this, but anyway, so yeah, it goes bottom up. All right. Now you've probably noticed this timer up here. It's time to talk about how that is defined. So let's go to that part of the code. So we'll talk about this next, but first of all, it's just going to be use stream to subject, and you pass in a function that returns an observable, and then the initial state of this store here. So this will wait for a subscription to come up from the bottom, and then it will create this observable and subscribe to it, and dump the result in this store here. So it creates its own internal store, and it's going to return that store. And then inside of use watch, it's going to watch for if it's activated. So that comes from below. And then I also wanted to propagate the completion event, but anyway, so yeah, since it's doing use subject, it's represented by a behavior subject in the Qwik store, but there is this observable that you give it that is actually doing the work, and so it subscribes and sets the value of the behavior subject to that value. So it's a little weird, but that's how it works, and it's trivial to change that for the next behavior. And you already saw a hint of this when I changed that code from earlier. That was just replacing this right here with client at the end. Use stream to subject client. So the one was called use stream to subject because it was it was streaming this observable into a subject. With the client, what it's going to do is it's going to immediately subscribe to this. But the benefit of this is it's sort of isolated from the rest of the stream. So you don't need to lazy load any downstream RxJS until this emits its first value. So let's look at that behavior. Yep. It's only 1 second, so let me wait, is that 1 second or 3 seconds? Well, defined it immediately. This is a little annoying. I think this might be a mistake of some kind. It's not supposed to load any downstream RxJS until the first value emits. So that kind of sucked. Okay, this is where I got rid of that utility function just right before this. And what that did was that, maybe that wasn't it. Hang on. Actually, I don't really get this because it should be working. Because this is happening, yeah, this is a client effect and it's running immediately, but it's just subscribing to that observable. And after it emits, it's going to set a value, and it's just like the user input for the behavior subject. It shouldn't trigger anything until that value changes. So let me look at this behavior a little more closely. Here's the problem. Didn't change this back to just a regular use subscribe. So if you use these utilities, you may end up running into that too. Okay, so yep, nothing is happening. After 3 seconds, it emits the first value. After 2 seconds, we'll see this activate, and then it will continue on. All right, that is exactly the behavior that was supposed to have. That this was supposed to have. All right, so that was the third. Now the fourth behavior that could cause RxJS to load is if we have a generic Qwik store that changes and we want RxJS to handle downstream stuff from there. Okay, so how do we turn a regular Qwik store into an Rx Qwik store? Well, I created a hook for that, so let's look at that. It's called use subject from store, and it takes in an input. I call it an input because it could either be a store or a tuple of a store and a property. So it assumes by default, if you pass in a store, it's just going to be the value property it's watching. And so this will work for signals. I'm so looking forward to trying out signals. But anyway, if you pass it in something more specific, you can have it watch another property. So if we look at alternative syntax, you can pass in prop and it will watch that. But anyway, you just pass in that one input and it returns a Qwik store, and it's just going to call use subject. So it turns the Qwik store into a behavior subject containing Qwik store under its Rx property, just like always. And it's just going to watch that the property, whatever one it is, and update the value of the behavior subject. And then use subject will internally push .next onto the behavior subject. So that was actually really easy to implement. And I could do a demo, but it's really boring. I'll demo it as part of the next one. All right, so that brings us to the fifth one. The fifth one isn't really something that triggers RxJS to load. It's more of a different kind of approach, but it's also compatible with this other stuff. So I put it in this main section of the article where this is how you can use RxJS is explained. So I'm going to scroll up super fast. So in contrast to this one, where nothing from the server is maintained basically, and everything gets set up on the client with these RxJS streams, and so it's just very RxJS heavy. With this other approach, it's mostly Qwik stores, but you're able to use the utility that RxJS provides inside. So Qwik has reactivity for synchronous stuff, right? That's what stores are. I'm struggling to figure out how to create a generic way to do derived state, synchronous state, in a way that later you could attach onto that asynchronous stuff. So that's been annoying to try to figure out, because it can't be synchronous if you pass in a generic function to it, because then it has to be a QRL and then it has to be a promise, and then it gets weird. So that's annoying, but in general, Qwik has its own reactive mechanisms, and we can create reactive stuff as well. Like in a video I did before, I made a use debounce hook that did the exact same thing as RxJS's use debounce time. Basically, it was a simplified version, but it was using just a use watch, and it would cancel, with its own cleanup. So it's got the mechanisms it needs to have the exact same structure of code as you can get in RxJS. But RxJS has a lot of utilities that are difficult to create, and that was kind of the topic of the last video I did, why RxJS support is so important, because there's a lot of benefit we get from these ready-made utilities so that we can code declaratively right now, and maybe over time implement these sort of native, like framework native methods of async reactivity. But anyway, so this other approach is basically like, what if we don't have these Rx stores anywhere? That's not totally true. Mostly, we don't have these Rx stores anywhere, but we're just like primarily we're dealing with Qwik stores, and then we just want for one like the gap between two Qwik stores, we just want to use a single operator from RxJS to handle some kind of asynchronous relationship. So the code for that would look like this. Now I wish Qwik had a way to define custom hooks that didn't do implicit first argument, because it would make it easy for type checking and everything if this was second, because then you type in first and then that would provide the type, and then when you're defining this, it would be there. So, but for now, the way you define it would be you type this and then you do like option left and then define that part. So you want to define this first for type inference and then define that. So anyway, that's a little thing. But anyway, so this is a function that returns an operator. And this will end up being, so under the hood, this is going to, I'll just look at the code. All right, so here's the code. It takes an input, same as that use subject from store hook that we just looked at for the fourth example. So it can either be a store or a tuple with a store and a property. And it's, yeah, actually it just calls that exact function right here. So that's going to create an Rx store with a behavior subject as the Rx property. Okay, so, and then we need an output store. And so this represents the Qwik store, the input, and this will represent the output of the observable operator. Okay, so we're going to watch for that Rx to be defined, and it's going to be defined as soon as that Qwik store triggers. So it just kind of falls into Qwik's normal reactivity flow where you've got like stores triggering stores to run. Then right here we have a store, and as soon as the property changes, we're going to have an Rx property that gets defined with the behavior subject, just like always. And we're tracking that, and if it's defined, then we're going to grab that operator that they defined, and we're going to apply that to the behavior subject and subscribe and set the value of this store. And then on cleanup, just unsubscribe from that. So very, very simple. You just use an operator for one step. And so this basically ignores RxJS's subscription mechanism. And I'll talk about that in a second more, but right here, you can do another trick with this. An operator basically takes an observable and returns a new observable. So you can actually define not just an operator, but like a function, and then provide multiple operators. And this is basically like a custom operator right here. You could just, I don't know. I think doing it in line is fine. Anyway, so here we're using this Rx function. So it's probably a good time to show you that code. It's very simple. Just make sure that there's an Rx property actually for this. Normally, if there isn't, then something's broken. But in this case, we need to define it first so that we can define the observable. And because this is Qwik's reactivity, we'll just use that initial value, and that's fine as the first value for the behavior subject. And when that Qwik store updates, we'll just get those values when they come. So anyway, this should work. It does work. Hopefully it works for all situations. But the main mindset here is that you are mostly just dealing with Qwik stores, and you're using RxJS for its neat utilities. And this actually enables you to... I haven't even tested this in a bit. Anyway, this enables you to have the behavior where you do code split by operator. So if you hit that, what's going to happen is first, we're going to load, that's the event handler. And then we're grabbing the behavior subject. I think it's in here. It's somewhere. Yeah, it's all this. So then it imports the behavior subject. And then it's going to import, like, after these other things get triggered. See, it's using the propagation delay, so it takes a bit, but see, it lazy loads this specific code. So we actually do get that ideal code splitting for RxJS. So this is my favorite approach so far, because it kind of fits better with Qwik. And so I think, Mishko and Manu would like it more. And it allows you to do fine-grained code splitting with RxJS operators, and you get the utilities for RxJS. And the one problem is that it ignores subscription, the entire subscription model of RxJS. It just ignores. So too bad, I guess. With this approach, you just don't get to use subscriptions. But Qwik, subscriptions are interesting. They're not the only way to get lazy values. I explain the final paragraph down here. Basically, you need two things. You need the ability to call a function on like an ongoing basis, and the ability to tell it we're done. So that's like a use effect in React, or a use watch here with the cleanup function. Because when it first gets called, the fact that the function is being called means the component's interested in it. So instead of fine-grained subscriptions, it's component level subscriptions. So if a hook is used in a component at all, and Qwik, I think, has the same rules as React, where it has to be consistent. Once it's in a component, that means you're interested in that data automatically. And you can actually even pass in a flag like enabled, like React Query has. And that allows you to even more granularly it enables you to control subscriptions even more if you need to. But basically, the fact that you're calling a hook means you're interested in the data, and that means there's an ongoing subscription. So you don't even need to really stress about the fact that you wouldn't have RxJS's regular native subscription model with this, the lazy behavior with that. I think it's actually probably okay. And so basically, this approach is good because you use Qwik stores primarily, and then you pull in RxJS utilities as you need them, and you can still get the lazy RxJS subscription type model. It's not as convenient, but you can get the same thing with hooks. And if you use like query keys or something, it's possible, and it could totally work. It could totally work. So I think I'm most optimistic about this pattern. I think if I were doing Qwik today, I would just do this. Yeah, I would do this for sure. And it kind of uses most of the utilities that I defined up to this point. So it's pretty good. It's unfortunate that how much code is required to support it. But these aren't set in stone, like the names of these functions, and it's not ready to be used as a library. But if you understand this code, there's no problem with you just copying it into your own code base and just getting it to work. And then you can maybe play with different models, but I would definitely prefer this one. So as I get more experience with Qwik, I'm taking a break for a bit. I'm going to focus on state-adapt stuff, because state-adapt is the coolest state management library on the planet. That's my opinion, but I'm holding on to that opinion pretty strongly. So I'm going to focus on that for a while. But subscribe and follow me on Twitter at mfpears, Pears, and on dev2, and on GitHub, why not? They're both the same, mfp22. And as Qwik news comes out, I like signals. I want to get my hands on those. And if I get experience with this, with like the combining like a hooks lazy approach with this Qwik centric approach, I will be writing about this in the future. It's just going to be a little while before I do it again, because this was a month. And granted, I wasn't like working full time on it, but it was, oh man, I'm excited to like do something else for a bit, to be honest. And then, here are those notes for the ideal pattern that I was talking about at the very beginning, with just subscriptions being serialized just the way you want with RxJS. And, things are still, it feels like Qwik is changing rapidly still. The dust is settling with it's just being determined what exactly Qwik is, with signals coming out and in-flight promises being serialized, that stuff. I'm looking forward to the future of Qwik and seeing what patterns are available. The one thing that still bugs me is that derived store thing. I really want to figure out how to do synchronous derived stores in a way where you don't have to know beforehand what downstream things might need to react to it. Anyway, so a lot of annoying things that I went through for that ideal solution, but anyway, I'm good with this so far. I like this Qwik centric approach. So, all right, that's it for this video. All right, thanks for watching. Let me know if you have questions or comments or hurtful insults. I'm welcome to all of it. So, all right, thanks. Bye.